I never knew my mother-in-law, Jean Joyner, but I'm absolutely sure, given all the stories I've heard, she was a wonderful person and a force of nature. She was also the light of hope for many women who were in need in rural Mississippi because she was a registered nurse and she was a midwife. In the 60s and 70s, when women had no insurance and no money, they knew they would be turned away from the local hospital. Driving 50 miles to Jackson and to a free hospital was seldom possible. Many of them would show up at her door and she would deliver their babies in her home. Just as often, they would call and she would go to their homes and deliver the babies there. Jean Joyner delivered countless babies all over central Mississippi, and my father-in-law often asked her to stop. He worried for her safety, but she didn't care. The care she provided was more important than any potential danger or problem. She was a tangible light of hope and compassion for many women in need, and the ripples of her compassion are still being felt. Recently, her great-granddaughter, who works as a first-grade teacher also in central Mississippi, was approached by a maintenance man at her school. He asked if she knew Jean Joyner. Lindsay said yes, and he told her she had delivered him and he was still grateful. From time to time, we need the light of hope others provide, or we need to be the light for others. Being the light is just a choice. Sometimes it comes easily, and sometimes, in order to truly live our values, we must consciously choose to be a light. As was the case for my mother-in-law, choosing to be a light was not always easy. In general, we think we know who we are and what's important, but often we find out we're not exactly who we imagined. Author Neale Donald Walsch wrote something I often recall when I realize that I'm not living in accordance with my claimed values. Over 20 years ago, his books precipitated my ongoing spiritual journey. But before I go on, I feel the need to provide a caveat. I'm not sure why other ministers write sermons, but many of my sermons are on topics I'm personally struggling with. This is particularly true for this sermon. I hope it resonates in some way for you. In Walsh's first book, he shared the following: only in the presence of something else can you know yourself. The entire saying is actually much longer, but for now that's enough. So once again, only in the presence of something else can you know yourself. As an example, let's say you're going to be a parent with a baby on the way. After the baby is born, parents often reflect that they had no idea how much they would love this child. They can't imagine ever going back to the way they were before the child was born. That's what love can do to you. In this case, an all-encompassing love isn't a choice. It's just what they now feel. They want to be the light for their child in this world. So only in the presence of the new baby do they know the tremendous love they now feel for this new child, and what a special love that is. But that doesn't always happen. Some people simply don't have any maternal or paternal instincts, and so when the child is born, those feelings don't come to life. But if they are responsible adults, they will still care for and take care of the child, even though the feelings that are supposed to be there just aren't. In this case, they choose to be the light for their child. So in the presence of this new child, they realize who they really are, but they still care for the child. Sadly, not everyone makes that choice. We don't always make good decisions for ourselves or others when faced with the various realities of life all around us. In the presence of something else, we might not turn out to be who we thought we'd be, so we have to make choices. In the last few years, and particularly in the last few months, the anger and hate I've witnessed around politics has brought out similar feelings and reactions in me. But when I remember Walsh's saying, "Only in the presence of something else can you know yourself," I don't like what I could easily become. I don't like the anger and hate I see in myself, and I don't want to be like that, and I certainly don't want it to consume me. My only choice is twofold. First, I must accept that those are my feelings. But secondly, I must consciously choose something else, something very different. I must choose a different path, one that allows the light I know to be inside to actually shine. I must choose to be a light, the light of understanding, the light of compassion, the light of assistance, the light of love, the light of hope. And that's not always easy. If instead I would choose to act on those negative feelings, I would simply be reflecting what I see in the world. And that's not who I choose to be. It's definitely easy to be swept away by anger and hate. That doesn't require any effort whatsoever. But trying to be understanding, compassionate, or of assistance all require concerted effort on my part. Yes, this being a light often requires actual effort. And that leads me to another analogy. And I hope this analogy makes sense. The country recently experienced several very different hurricanes. And before they struck, we all knew they were headed our way. Hurricane Beryl hit Houston in July, and there were 73 deaths. In early August, Hurricane Debby hit Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, and 10 people died. Hurricane Helene then struck in September, once again striking Florida, but also Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, the Virginians, and even more tragically, 234 people died. And finally, Hurricane Milton became a huge storm in October, and we all feared the worst as it headed for Florida. 35 people were killed, but the damage was far less than imagined. All of these storms had one thing in common. The sun came out after they left, and neighbors came out to start the cleanup. Some people died, but most survived, and that's generally what happens after every major disaster. Most people survive and are left to clean up and help those actually hurt by the disaster. Soon after, other people came from near and far to help with food, first aid, and restorations. They shared the light of hope with those in need in all the affected areas. For me, it feels like a political hurricane is now headed our way. But the reality is, we don't know how it will turn out, as a major disaster or just a lot of wind. There is one thing we can do regardless of what happens, and that is to be a light for people in need, regardless of what's going on in general or because of the repercussions of what we imagine is about to happen. Adding more hate and anger to society won't do any good whatsoever. Being a light for others when we are able will absolutely help. So be a light And that's what I hope I choose to be. And letting our light shine, not only for ourselves, but for others, is something religions have been reminding us forever. Jesus was very direct on that particular subject. In Matthew chapter 5, he said, "You are the light." He then said, "Don't hide your light under a bushel, but put it on a lampstand where it sheds light for everyone to see." Jesus challenged each of us to share the light we possess. And I think his analogy is perfect. We turn on night lights so we don't get lost in the dark and hurt ourselves. And parents put night lights in their children's rooms so that they can see there are no monsters in the room. And also so that they can find their way to their parents when some fear is simply too much to bear. We should always provide light for those we want to help, and especially for those we love. And from the Jewish tradition, UU minister Stephen Schick shares a verse from Isaiah. "If you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday." Reverend Schick then shares a personal reflection. The struggle to feed the hungry and free the oppressed is daunting. The heart is quickly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task. To find light in the darkness of circumstances with the odds against you is not easy. But the Hebrew prophet Isaiah asserts that justice work itself carries with it a built-in light switch that will make our night like the noonday. He goes on to write, "I was sitting in a courtroom the first time I saw a person with a glowing internal light. He faced the judge with a confident, pleasant countenance. He explained why he refused to pay his taxes. 'I have no objection paying taxes,' he said, 'but my conscience will not allow me to contribute to our government's war effort. That money should be spent to feed the hungry.' At that moment, you could see the light of noonday spread across the room. The reward for spending ourselves for a just cause is discovering the eternal light within us and knowing that it will turn on as we work for peace and justice." Choosing to be a light, as I've already said, is not always easy. One reason it may be difficult is that we allow injustice to consume our light and allow worry to take over. As Gavin de Becker writes in The Gift of Fear, "When you worry, ask yourself, what am I choosing not to see right now? What important things am I missing because I choose worry over introspection, alertness, or wisdom?" Another way of putting it, does getting upset provide me with more options? If an emotion can't change the condition or the situation I'm dealing with, it's likely an unhelpful emotion, or quite possibly a destructive one. Real strength lies in the control of one's emotions, not in pretending they don't exist. So go ahead, feel it. Just don't lie to yourself by conflating emoting about a problem and dealing with the problem. You can always remind yourself, I am in control, not my emotions. I see what's going on here. I'm not going to get excited or upset. After all, I'm probably not going to die from any of this. It might help to say it over and over again whenever you feel the anxiety begin to come on. I'm not going to die from this. I'm not going to die from this. Or try a question Stoic philosopher and Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius often asked of himself. Does what happened keep me from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, straightforwardness, and humility? So I'll pose the question for all of us. Does what's happened politically actually prevent us from being a light for someone else? If not, then choose to be a light. Sometimes, however, I find myself looking for some special recognition for being a light and doing the right thing. That's not truly being a light or being altruistic. Sharing your light is no guarantee that it will be seen or acknowledged. Your light may be even taken for granted. Being a light, being altruistic, has to be its own reward. And one other thing, we often allow ourselves to get caught up in bigger crusades like the plastics crisis or climate change. And yes, we need to keep fighting those battles. But those are long-term battles, battles which won't be won in our lifetimes. And while we're obsessing over those battles, we shouldn't forget about the person, often right next to us, who needs our light and needs our help right now, during the middle of some hurricane-like event or soon after, when our help is even more practical. And being the light comes in many different forms. By being a loving parent, by being a good teacher, by being an attentive caregiver, even with something as simple as by being a generous tipper. That tip may help pay a worrisome bill or help buy a Christmas or birthday present for a child who would otherwise have gone without. In reality, you will never know how most of the light you share manifests or how it helps someone else. But the organization Still We Rise provides these simple instructions for living in a broken world. Lean into community. Seek out love. Applaud the good you see. Keep paying attention. Talk to your neighbors. Dance to the music and embrace art. Look for love and small joys. Take breaks and relish in nourishing your body. Donate what you can. Linger at the dinner table with friends. Check in with your people. Let yourself grieve. Love one another as deeply as you are able. The storm is upon us, and we must hold on. And remember, don't give up. We're here together. Author Bianca Sparacino says, be the person who cares. Be the person who makes an effort, who loves without hesitation. Be the person who makes people feel seen. There is nothing stronger than someone who continues to stay soft in a world that hasn't always been kind to them. Dr. Jane Goodall, primatologist and anthropologist, says, above all, we must realize that each of us makes a difference with our life. Each of us impacts the world around us every single day. We have a choice to use the gift of our life to make the world a better place or not to bother. But one of my favorite sayings comes from author J.R.R. Tolkien. He wrote, "Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that's not what I have found. It's the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love." All of these thoughts remind us that the light we share may help another see their way in our world, which is often difficult and almost impossible to navigate. The light each of us provides may make all the difference in the world. So our choices are actually rather simple. Do we want to reflect the anger and hatred we sometimes see around us? Or do we choose to let our individual lights shine with our tangible expressions of hope and love? Amen and namaste.